As we have seen, the Baroque is a period in which money, influence, and power rules the day. Musicians, as well as other artists and tradesmen, provide cultural pursuits directly to upper-class patrons through employment in large courts, estates, and churches. Music is written to glorify the prestige of the person who paid for it. That said, of course, as is the case in all periods, composers found ways to transcend these boundaries. Despite its limitations as a status symbol for the wealthy, the music of the Baroque period is energetic, expressive, and emotional. First, music of the Baroque must grab the listener's attention. There was much competition for good jobs, and it was in the best interest of the composer to create something that displayed their own talent while also engaging the audience quickly and directly. As such, Baroque music tends to focus on conveying an affect, or an emotional response. In Baroque terms, the word affect refers to the ability of music to solicit an involuntary emotional response in the listener. In other words, we do not create the feelings we experience from music. Rather, the music generates those feelings in us. For the purpose of clarity, and since this is a science-minded culture which prefer to isolate, classify, and study variables, a single piece of music, or sometimes a single section within a piece, was generally intended to convey only one affect, or one isolated emotional response. An affect can vary between something very intense, such as anguish, to something rather light and entertaining, such as the peaceful feeling of enjoying a bright spring day, as in Vivaldi's Primavera, or Spring, from the Four Seasons. At the same time, the use of high contrast became very common in both art and music. This occurred for a number of reasons. First, it is a great way to grab the listener or the viewer's attention. Secondly, and probably more importantly, it was part of the scientific perspective that dominated this period. Just as a scientist might isolate and investigate a specific variable, the composer or artist enjoyed highlighting and isolating various elements in their works. For a visual art example, this can be seen in a portrait by Rembrandt, in which he uses contrasts of light and dark, of social class, of textures, of posture, and of many other elements in the picture that draw attention to its purpose and meaning. In music, composers often wrote sudden contrasts of volume or dynamics, such as from loud or forte to soft or piano. Composers might also use sudden contrasts of key, such as shifting from major to minor or vice versa. Vocal music dominates history up to this point and continues to be performed frequently, particularly in operas and in church. But in the Baroque period, instrumental music becomes quite popular as well. This is partly related to improvements in technology and instrument building that led to instruments actually sounding good enough to keep pace with singing. But it is also part of a greater shift towards using music as a means to express an emotional affect. If music is capable of achieving that end, then it should be possible to do so without the use of words. Therefore, composers felt that creating emotions out of purely musical tones was a formidable and attractive challenge. Further, the appearance of well-built instruments allowed for individuals to reach a high level of performance mastery, a state known as virtuosity, which was attractive to the somewhat elitist society of the Baroque. In the same way that the nobility wanted ornamented and opulent surroundings, having the best, most technically brilliant performer on staff was an important sign of status. With the rise of instrumental music, composers began for the first time to consider not only what they were writing, but what instruments might perform it. This meant that part of the compositional process was to include idiomatic writing, or music that is suitable to the particular instrument that would be performing it. For example, flutes do certain things well, such as playing quick, light passages, and violins are more adept at performing long lyrical lines or melodies with big leaps. For this reason, unlike the Renaissance period, composers usually specified which instruments were to perform their music. This was often related to what instrumentalists were available or on hand, so Baroque music is often written for small bands of mixed winds, strings, or percussion. A new instrument for the Baroque, and one which can be heard in almost all Baroque music, is the harpsichord. It is a predecessor to the modern piano, but is different to that instrument in several key ways. First, the strings are plucked rather than struck, so the sound is somewhat of a combination between a guitar and a harp. Second, because of the way that this mechanism works, the instrument is not capable of playing very many different volumes or dynamic levels. Some harpsichords have a lever for changing from loud to slightly less loud, but all in all, this instrument is not capable of very much dynamic shading. Together with the cello, the harpsichord forms what is known as the basso continuo. This is a duet of musicians responsible for playing the bass line and harmony of Baroque music. This enabled composers to give the music a strong foundation so that it sounds more structured and organized for the listener. It is also the basis for the newer texture of homophony, or melody plus accompaniment. The reason that this texture, which is what we might call a song texture today, became popular is because it was believed that this was the best way to convey emotion, through the focus on a single melody. The multiple melodies of Renaissance polyphony seemed, to Baroque ears, to cloud the texture and take away from the emotional affect. At the same time, in keeping with the scientific need to provide structure to all things, musical elements such as rhythm, harmony, and dynamics became much more standardized and ordered in the Baroque. Music was worked into predictable patterns of organization so that it became easier to understand for the listener and easier to manipulate for the composer. As a result, Baroque music can solicit an emotional affect in a way that was not possible before this time period.